12 ships, 1 port. October 1347. Europe's worst nightmare begins. Within months, the Black Death would kill faster than any war, any famine, any disaster the continent had ever known. Entire cities lost 9 out of every 10 people. But the plague did not become history's deadliest catastrophe by accident. It took a perfect collision of biology, ignorance, and a world completely unprepared for what was coming. Long before the plague ships reached Sicily, the Black Death was already on the move. Archaeologists have traced Yersinia pestis DNA in 13th century graves scattered across the Mongol steppes, silent proof that the pandemic's fuse was burning far to the east. In the decades before 1347, outbreaks swept through Central Asia and the Middle East, following the arteries of trade. Caravans and merchant fleets carried not just silk and spices, but rats and fleas infected with a bacterium no one in Europe had ever seen. The Silk Road tied together bustling cities and remote outposts, creating a network where disease could leap continents. Mongol administrators, ruling over vast stretches of steppe, sometimes imposed relay quarantines, closing postal routes, halting travel, and burning infected goods. But these early containment measures stopped at the empire's edge. As the pathogen crossed into Europe, it found a continent divided by borders, rival kings, and city-states, each with their own laws. There was no central authority, no coordinated public health system, and no warning. Italian statutes governed only their own harbors. French and German towns acted alone, if at all. By the time the Genoese fleet fled the besieged port of Kaffa, the machinery of prevention had already failed. The ships carried a deadly cargo, grain, furs, and a disease that had mastered the art of travel. Europe's fragmented politics and patchwork statutes left it exposed, blind to a threat already sweeping west. The stage was set for disaster, and no one inside the city walls of Messina could see what was coming. Inside the walls of Messina, the disease struck with a speed and violence that defied belief. It began with a sudden fever, body temperatures soaring to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Within hours, victims felt a deep ache in their joints and a crushing fatigue. Then came the buboes, apple-sized swellings, black and hot to the touch, erupting in the groin, armpit, or neck. These were not mere lumps, but masses of dying flesh, turning the skin a mottled purple and black. Medieval witnesses wrote of faces drained to an ashen gray, lips cracked with thirst, and a stink of decay that filled the air long before death arrived. The agony was relentless. Diarrhea, vomiting, bleeding from the nose and mouth each signaled that the infection had reached the bloodstream. The body's own immune system, overwhelmed, unleashed a storm of chemicals in a desperate bid to fight back. This modern concept, a cytokine storm, meant the body attacked itself from within, leading to rapid organ failure and sepsis. Death often came within 2 to 4 days of the first symptoms. In some cases, it was even faster. The lucky ones slipped into delirium. The rest endured every minute. Some carried the plague in a silent form, without a sign, moving through markets and homes, spreading the bacterium before their own bodies collapsed. Medieval doctors could do nothing. Infirmaries overflowed. Priests and physicians abandoned their posts. The city's defenses, legal, spiritual, and medical, crumbled as the plague advanced, claiming victim after victim with terrifying efficiency. The disease did not just kill, it shattered the very fabric of daily life, leaving behind a city in shock and a continent on the brink. No one in medieval Europe understood how the plague moved, but its advance was relentless. For centuries, the classic explanation centered on black rats and their fleas. Fleas, feeding on infected rats, would bite humans, regurgitating Yersinia pestis into the bloodstream. Archaeologists have uncovered flea remains in plague burial layers from London to Florence, and genetic analysis of ancient teeth reveals the same bacterium, complete with the YMT gene, which allows Yersinia pestis to survive inside the flea gut. When a flea's digestive tract clogged with bacteria, it grew desperate, biting host after host and vomiting infection into every wound. Yet the rat flea story alone cannot explain the speed or reach of the Black Death. In 7 out of 9 well-documented cities, outbreaks erupted almost simultaneously, too fast for rats to migrate between them. That pattern fits another suspect, the human body louse. Lice thrive in crowded, unwashed populations. They travel with people, not rodents, and can transmit pathogens through broken skin. Modern statistical models show that the timing of plague surges across Europe matches the movement of humans more closely than the spread of rats. DNA from lice combs and burial sites remains inconclusive, but the lice hypothesis refuses to die. A third possibility haunts the margins of the story: airborne spread. Some scientists point to later outbreaks in cold, damp northern towns, places where fleas should have died off. Genetic sequencing of plague victims from these sites reveals mutations in the plague gene, a change that could, in theory, make lung infection and respiratory transmission more likely. No direct evidence confirms the Black Death became fully airborne, but the debate continues. What is clear is this: the Black Death did not rely on a single route. Fleas, lice, and possibly coughs all worked together, turning medieval Europe's dense cities and constant human movement into a perfect storm of exposure. The result was a pandemic that outpaced every attempt at containment, overwhelming cities before anyone could understand what was happening. Across Europe, entire populations vanished in a matter of months. Parish registers, tax rolls, and burial records all tell the same story: a continent stripped bare. Recent estimates put the death toll at 50 to 70 million, nearly half of all Europeans alive before the plague arrived. In the countryside, the silence became permanent. After the First World War, aerial surveys revealed the outlines of hundreds of deserted medieval villages, fields overgrown, stone foundations, swallowed by grass. No living memory of who once called these places home. In England alone, more than 1,000 villages disappeared from the map, their names lingering only in old tax ledgers. Florence, a city famed for its wealth and art, became a cautionary legend. Chroniclers wrote that 9 out of every 10 Florentines died, though modern research points to a loss closer to half. Even so, the effect was total. Streets emptied, churches rang their bells only for the dead, and entire neighborhoods stood abandoned. The city's tax base collapsed. Surviving officials recorded the devastation in ledgers that suddenly listed far fewer names. What the plague left behind was not just a death toll, but a scar across the land, visible in ruined farmsteads, silent towns, and the hollowed heart of Europe's greatest cities. The scale of the Black Death was not measured only in bodies, but in the erasure of communities, the sudden emptiness of once crowded worlds. Medical knowledge in 1348 offered little more than ritual and guesswork. Physicians bled patients, hoping to drain away the poison. They lanced buboes with red-hot irons, turning agony into sepsis. Herbal smoke from rosemary, sage, and vinegar filled the air as a desperate attempt to ward off invisible corruption. None of it worked. Guy de Chauliac, the most respected surgeon in France, wrote that he stayed in Avignon, out of duty while others fled. His letters, later collected in the Chirurgia Magna, describe a profession in retreat, doctors abandoning their posts and leaving the sick to die alone. By 1349, the exodus of healers was almost total. In Florence, Paris, and London, the best educated minds locked their doors or vanished into the countryside. The priests who remained suffered the same fate as their flocks. Papal bulls from Clement VI begged clergy to offer last rites, but entire parishes were left without priests as death swept through monasteries and churches. Some regions lost nearly half their spiritual leaders. Without guidance, families turned on each other. The machinery of care, medical, spiritual, and civic, collapsed in weeks. The sick died untended. The healthy ran. The plague did not just kill people. It shattered every system meant to help them. Beneath the chaos of the Black Death, other killers may have lurked. At East Smithfield in London, soil samples from plague graves contained dormant spores of anthrax, Bacillus anthracis, preserved for centuries in the burial earth. Some scientists argue these spores hint at a hidden co-infection, a second microbe compounding the devastation. Others point out that the evidence is patchy, the clinical signs ambiguous, and the anthrax DNA could have seeped in long after the bodies were buried. The debate remains unresolved, but the possibility of a microbial double blow cannot be dismissed. Meanwhile, the plague left its mark not just in graveyards, but deep in human DNA. Genetic studies reveal a tiny edge. People carrying the CCR5 Delta 32 mutation, about 0.2% of the population, were slightly more likely to survive. Over generations, this survival advantage multiplied. Today, around 15% of Europeans carry this variant, a living echo of natural selection under siege. The aftermath reached far beyond biology. The loss of nearly half the workforce upended the medieval order. In England, the Statute of Labourers of 1351 tried to freeze wages and tie peasants to the land, but the law quickly buckled under economic reality. Surviving workers demanded higher pay and mobility. Old feudal bonds frayed, and fortunes changed hands overnight. The Medici family, banking powerhouses in Florence, reaped windfalls from abandoned estates and orphaned accounts. Their wealth, drawn from the aftermath of mass death, funded artists, architects, and scholars. The Renaissance, in part, was financed by the dead, as Europe rebuilt itself from the ashes of the plague. Pandemics don't just kill, they reset the world. The Black Death's blackened buboes and two-day death tolls tore through society, funding a new era on the graves of millions. Today, as new threats emerge, Every system's weakness is still a catalyst. History never waits for us to be ready.